The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
A White House whistleblower has told members of Congress under oath that more than 25 people in Donald Trump's administration have been denied security clearances, except that they got those security clearances because after the denials were issued, they were overturned by Donald Trump, people working directly for Donald Trump. The whistleblower's name is Tricia Newbold. She has been a White House security advisor for a very long time. She's worked for Democratic administrations, Republican administrations, and she testified before the House Oversight Committee that she and her colleagues researched dozens of security clearances. Their research, which they know how to do, came back with the conclusion that they should deny these dozens of clearances, sometimes based on the risk of the person to be blackmailed, for example, sometimes because of the belief that they were under or subject to being influenced by foreign powers, sometimes for other reasons. And someone associated with the Trump administration came in and said, we are giving these people security clearances, as the case is. This is all backed up with a paper trail of documents that Tricia Newbold provided to the House panel. Newbold is an authority here, okay? I mean, like I said, she's done this for decades. She's worked for Republican presidents, for Democratic presidents. This is not political for her. She analyzes the person and makes a determination. Should there be a security clearance granted or should there not be? But she now says that she has to speak out because she warned her superiors clearances are being approved under the Trump administration that shouldn't be. This is a national security threat. And she claims to have been retaliated against for speaking up. Now, we don't yet know the full scope of who this applies to. We know that Jared Kushner and Ivanka Trump are certainly possibilities based on what we've learned so far. The New York Times is reporting that John Bolton, Donald Trump's national security advisor, is one of the people about whom the White House, whom the House of Representatives, rather, has subpoenaed documents, which would be utterly disgraceful. I mean, imagine if the national security advisor of the United States, one of the top national security officials, maybe the top national security official, would not ordinarily qualify for a security clearance, and Donald Trump or someone working for Trump decided to override that determination in order to give them a security clearance with access to some of the most sensitive information that anyone in government has to deal with. It would be an atrocity. There are other instances we know about where Ms. Newbold and her colleagues wrote very detailed explanations about why this person or that person shouldn't get a security clearance. And they were sometimes told to, quote, not touch the case. And ultimately, those security clearances were approved. So this is the politicization of national security. I mean, listen, in general, in American government, national security is politicized. I'm not going to pretend to you that under Bush, national security wasn't at all political, or that under Obama, national security wasn't at all political, but it's being politicized in the Trump administration way more than we have become used to even in our system. The powerful and the wealthy are controlling every department of government in way more intrusive ways than we have become accustomed to. Nothing that even under standard operating procedure was controlled by incompetent buffoons is safe right now. They serve the interests of the people even less than most administrations. They are even more greedy than most administrations. And I don't know. I mean, this is one of those things, Pat, where is anything going to happen? Are there going to be any consequences here? Because the House is, good for them. They're investigating everything that they rightly believe should be investigated. But ultimately, like, what's going to happen with this?
Well, there should be consequences, and those consequences should come from Trump supporters and Republicans, because remember, they said that Hillary Clinton was completely untrustworthy, right? She handled sensitive information on a private email server and thus had no respect for, our intelligence community. Well, Trump and the White House is doing the exact same thing here. And I think they'll just move the goalposts on it. They'll say that now the intelligence community is overrun by the deep state, that they're not trustworthy anymore, and the Russia investigation was Exhibit A for that. So, yeah, I mean, totally moving the goalposts. Everything's different now.
Yeah, and of course, I mean, the people who, Tricia Newbold is not even part of the intelligence community, but they'll frame it that way, and they're laughing all the way to the bank under Trump's tax plan. They shouldn't even be in these positions in Trump's cabinet and as national security advisor, many of them. And we have people who specialize in security clearances saying there are dozens of people who should not be cleared, should not have access to this information, and they do. And Pat's right. There's one way to hold them accountable, and it's by voting in 2020, period. And I hope every single one of you is going to do that. I have for you today one of the most cringe-inducing interviews I've seen in my time doing this type of thing in online media and broadcast media. So this apparently, I have to back up a little bit. Candace Owens. Candace Owens is this sort of fabricated black conservative hero, very well-funded. She has quickly become a darling of the pro-Trump right. And she, I guess, has a new show. The show is part of the outrageously right-wing Prager University on YouTube, connected with outrageous right-winger Dennis Prager. So I guess she has a show there now. I don't know how new it is. I've never seen it before. I think it's pretty new. Yesterday, I saw the first episode of My Life. And one of these first episodes contains an interview with cultural critic Dave Rubin, okay? The interview is a case study in sophistry and faux intellectualism, but I don't even really want to call it that. It's not even faux intellectualism. No one would actually mistake it for that. It's more like faux intellectualism. It's faux intellectualism that even fails to be that, if you can imagine. And it was rife with just a panoply of not even just bad ideas, but obviously dumb ideas, widely debunked ideas. And I felt the cringe, like the hairs on my arms went up because my body physically could not tolerate the meaningless and vapid nature of this discussion, all framed as reasonable people talking about ideas and pointing out how terrible and off the rails everybody else is, including, of course, primarily the American left. This is an hour long or an hour and 5 or 10 minutes long. I don't know that I would recommend that you watch it all. If you do, you can put it on 2x speed on YouTube and get through the bulk of it in like 25 minutes without including the first and last minutes, which are sort of like a wind up and a wind down where Dave Rubin and Candace Owens just throw bouquets at each other. I'm not going to include any of that here today. So I'm just skipping around. This is not a comprehensive tour of the interview. You can randomly drop in at any point during this thing, and you're going to find a treasure trove of absurdity. But let's start with this moment sort of early in the interview where Candace Owens tells Dave Rubin that she's going to confront him and call him out. And of course, this is meant to show that they're not scared of disagreement. Everyone can respectfully disagree and get along, and no one gets offended. Except what she wants to call him out about is that he's simply too smart to be a classical liberal. He's too smart to have the word liberal associated with him at all, even though classical liberalism is very right-wing. So she wants to call him out. Wow, what courage it took from Candace Owens. Take a look.
And I'm going to call you out on something.
Yes, let's fight,
we're already
please.
2 minutes in.
Yeah,
right?
we're
so
2 minutes in. We said
it.
nice things about each other.
I'm so sick of you saying that you're a classical liberal. It makes me physically nauseous, okay? The whole world knows that there's just no way. You're too practical, you're too smart, and you're not one of those people that's, I'm still learning. We've watched your stuff, okay? You've spoken to so many people. You have an in-depth knowledge of things that, you've done stuff on even drugs and psychedelics, and you're like a wealth of knowledge, and yet you insist on calling yourself a classical liberal, and it's cheap, and it's ending today.
Well, first off, I want to thank you for putting vodka in here, because that's going to help this portion of the conversation. Okay, so look, I am a classical liberal, and I would argue if we sit here long enough, I can get you to admit that you're a classical liberal too.
This is, I mean, it's difficult to watch. It's really difficult to watch. You're just too smart for being anything with the word liberal in it. Of course, totally ignorant of the fact that small L liberalism is not progressivism in the sort of modern American context. And Rubin is right. He probably could convince her that she's a classical liberal, because classical liberalism is just a semantic game for conservatism or a particular brand of it. We did a long expose about it. I don't need to get into it, but conservatives now are playing this sort of semantic game with classical liberalism. Okay, let's go to another point where Candace Owens defends Alex Jones. Now, this is just amazing. Recently, she said Hitler's problem was going beyond Germany with his goals. She skipped over the killing of 6 million Jews. If Hitler had simply remained a nationalist versus becoming a globalist, wrong use of the word globalist, but it doesn't matter, then that would have been a whole other thing, and Hitler would have been much more reasonable. Here she is defending Alex Jones.
I think if there's one thing that I've learned, and I'm constantly growing and learning, it's just that I actually really have a problem with the way that social media has banned certain people. Like, I've probably watched 10 minutes of the Alex Jones show, of InfoWars, of his show, and it was the 10 minutes that I was on it when I first started, right? Yeah. And I sat next to him, and to be honest, he kind of is like a WWE style, like screaming at the mic, and nothing that he said, or at least while I was sitting there, and again, I'm ignorant, I'm pleading ignorance here, was something that is worthy of being banned from every platform. And they're also banning people in the ways they make income, and you can't use PayPal, and you can't use Stripe.
You can't, and this has happened with Chase Bank now too. I mean, it's happened with all sorts of things,
And my whole perspective is that it's today you, tomorrow me.
Understand what she's saying. I've never seen any Alex Jones except for the 10 minutes when he was interviewing me. And during those 10 minutes, he didn't say anything that was ban-worthy. So therefore, it's wrong for him to be banned from any platforms. What about the persistent peddling of conspiracy theories leading to legal action against him? What about the multiple large-scale bullying campaigns of individuals, breaking every element of the terms and conditions of private companies, who I thought Candace would support having their rights as private companies to decide who's on their platform and who isn't respected? Or does she think that that's not to be respected? And it's so brilliant. I might be ignorant, but in the 10 minutes I was on the Alex Jones show, which she claims are the only 10 minutes she's ever seen, she didn't see anything that justified a ban of Alex Jones on any platform. Sounds like she's super well placed to be the person deciding what what platforms should be doing with Alex Jones, right? I mean, this is just idiocy at the highest level. Then they go into sort of race and IQ stuff, again, with this totally bogus notion that the left doesn't want to talk about so-called biological realities. It's all about being real and a realist, and they start sort of dancing around it. Take a look.
Speaking of feminism, feminism and trans debate, like, how's that gonna kind of go in together? Because I thought feminism, classic feminism, we want equality with men, and we've carved out all of these spaces for us in sports, and now all of a sudden men can, if you talk about the patriarchy, can step into what we're doing and beat us at everything, because biologically, right, they can do that. I don't want men abusing women unless they're wrestling them and saying they identified in a chokehold. And it's insane to me that this is okay, that this is even a debate or a discussion.
Well, this is, I mean, but this is what they do. They stake out crazy positions and then they make you negotiate backwards. So, like, look, the worst player in the NBA, the worst male professional basketball player would be the MVP of the WNBA.
That's exactly right.
That's just true. I don't take some great pleasure in saying that.
Transphobic.
Yeah, I remember there was this woman when the
So this is straw manning on multiple levels. First of all, they're mostly talking about issues that, number one, aren't really that important. Like, okay, I agree that there is a reasonable position to take that if you were born biologically male, does it make sense for you to compete in wrestling against individuals born biologically female? Probably not. It's not transphobic, but it's also not a big issue. It's not a significantly important issue in our culture. It doesn't connect to, listen, if people born biologically male can wrestle women, then the next thing you know, I don't even know, right? I mean, this is straw manning, as in that, in the sense that these are not even really the most important issues. But it's also straw manning in that if you want to talk about equality between men and women, it's not about people born biologically male who get to wrestle against women, right? That doesn't destroy feminism. This is not something that the left is even consumed with. Many people don't think if you're born biologically male, people on the left, you should be able to wrestle women. And it's just really not a major issue. If you're talking about chess, for example, where the division between men and women is more because there are more male grandmasters and you want to incentivize women to participate, and if they are competing in a group that is women, well, we've talked about this, right? But if you're born biologically male and you are a trans woman and you want to participate in women's chess, who cares? I mean, like, of course, that's completely fine. This is just not the hill on which anyone is holding this debate, and they're pretending that that's the case. And then they get into this biological realities farce that the left just doesn't want to talk about biological realities.
When I remember when the WNBA started, there was this woman, Cynthia Cooper, who played on the Houston, I think they were the Houston Comets, and she was awesome. She was awesome. But I remember thinking she would be a scrub in the NBA. You know what I mean? Because she was still small. Women generally are smaller. Mm-hmm. She wasn't really that fast compared to the way a fast man is. These are just biological realities. And they don't want us to be able to talk about biological realities. I don't like seeing those pictures. When I see a trans athlete, so a male to female trans athlete choking a woman, and then I see the women on the left and the women's march and that crew, the feminists defending that, because they've created this intersectional pyramid where now trans is sort of above female and Islam is above that and this is above that and this is above that.
This is just so stupid, right? Who could watch this and say, you know what, that's really insightful and interesting. This is a clinic on straw manning. They've set up and agreed upon false pillars of feminism and trans rights. And now they're in their echo chamber agreeing about how bad it is that the left doesn't want to talk about this stuff. They've set the parameters of the debate in a fraudulent way. This is not the real debate that is happening. And then they critique it. This is how an echo chamber works. You know, by the way, the whole they don't want to talk about biological realities. There is no biological reality that the left in total doesn't want to talk about. You can find individuals who have views that are wacky, and there are plenty of individuals on the right that have wacky views. Usually when they talk about biological realities, they eventually get to race and IQ. And we know the biological realities there. They are not the realities of the so-called race realists. And it's not that the left isn't allowing a conversation about it. It's that it's been widely researched. We're bored by it at this point. Insisting that black people are dumber because they are black on the basis of IQ tests, it's old news, it's boring, and you're not someone who is shutting down debate because you're sick of the old, tired, debunked debate. So that's a little bit of the show. It's stunning that I think in some conservative circles, what you just saw counts as like nuanced discussion. If you were to parody such an interview, if you were to parody an interview between Candace Owens and Dave Rubin, it would be identical. I mean, it's indistinguishable from a parody of itself. Also important to mention, they talk about the free market of ideas. This is not the free market because these are really well-funded operations. PragerU, which is extraordinarily well-funded, brought in Candace Owens, and now she's in this position where it's, wow, she's really, this is the free market. It's not. She was forced upon people by organizations like Turning Point USA and PragerU, and they don't even, they're not even subscribing to the principles they claim to. Let me know what you think. I'm on Twitter at dpacman. Show is on Twitter at David Pakman Show.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Today's new member of the day is Ross Parlett. Ross, thank you for being a David Pakman Show member. Also, thanks to James Kelly, who's today's longtime sustaining member of the day. Join them by becoming a member at www.joinpakman.com. Very inexpensive, great perks, and you're supporting the David Pakman Show, which is a great thing to be doing. Okay, so Canadian professor Jordan Peterson has claimed for a long time that he's not political. And not a sort of espouser of right-wing ideas. And yet he recently appeared at extremist, outrageous right-wing Christian Liberty University. This is the evangelical school that has a policy of no premarital sex on campus, no private interactions between members of the opposite sex on campus. It was founded by the late Jerry Falwell, who claimed that abortionists and feminists and gay people were to blame for 9/11. That's where Jordan Peterson appeared on a panel with a bunch of right-wing religious nuts to engage, I guess, in a discussion of ideas or something. Just as a reminder, in an interview with Politico last year, Peterson said what he does is not political, even though it obviously is. He says it's merely psychological, I guess, like the psychology of why a bogus caricature of Marxism and postmodernism is terrible for everyone, and how the bad left wanting equality of outcome, which we don't, is bad for everyone. It's not political. Remember, you can't say that. It's merely psychological. Most people know this is bogus. And then he appears at Liberty University, and I'll play some clips. Here he is saying very non-political stuff that sounds exactly like right-wing stuff, but it isn't. Like, for example, here he praises David Nasser, who's the senior vice president for spiritual development at Liberty University, for how great his opening was and how great it is to speak at Liberty University, which isn't cynical and toxic like other universities.
By the way, I loved your opening. It's so nice to come to a gathering like this that isn't characterized by like a toxic understructure of cynicism. You know, I see that in so many universities, and it's really corrosive, and I hate to see it among young people because, well, first of all, you haven't earned your cynicism. That would be the first thing. But second, well, second, because it's so corrosive, and it's such a catastrophe to go to institutes of higher learning and see that what's being developed in young people when they're first starting to open themselves up to the world is a cynicism that tells them before they know anything that life is a terrible catastrophe.
Liberty University, which is an outrageous right-wing university that pretends we're living in the 1800s, is the one university that Jordan Peterson has found that's not toxic or cynical. The problem is that without critical thinking, with science blended with religion, people end up in a fantasy world where they're not even able to reflect in a way that gets them to question the structures of society and the status quo. That's what he's identifying at Liberty University. And this is a right-wing idea that he's espousing. But again, remember, he's not political. He just says the one university doing it right is one of the craziest right-wing Christian universities in the country, if not the world. And I know his supporters will say, David, his appearance at Liberty, it's not political. He's doing his psychology. He'll do it anywhere people want to have him. He's engaging in debate and all of that stuff. Liberty University wants him there for a reason. And this is so funny, by the way. David Nasser, this guy I told you about who's on the panel, he's part of Liberty University, says, hey, I went to Barnes & Noble and the employees were all talking about how it's all men buying your book. Normally women come in and buy more books than men, but it's men who are coming in and buying your books, which is so funny because this is one of those allegations that has dogged Peterson for a while, that he's appealing overwhelmingly disproportionately to men, and he's had to sort of handle it in different ways. And even the guy at Liberty University mentions it. Take a look.
So many of our students have just been impacted by you. Over 3 million books have been sold. I walked into the Barnes & Noble the other day, and you know you're doing well when you've got good product placement in a book right in the front, but you know you're doing really well where they have stacks and stacks of your book behind the cash register just to keep up with the demand. And the young lady that was there started talking to me a little bit, and then this other employee came up and he said, it's been interesting. So many men are buying this book. Typically women are a lot more frequent, you know, shoppers at a bookstore these days, but he said this book is just taking over the world.
Listen, it's not bad if mostly men like Jordan Peterson's book, and it's not bad if he's basically a right-wing actor. It's fine. Just don't pretend to be apolitical. Don't pretend to be not right-wing. Don't pretend that your audience isn't mostly male. Just embrace it. Explain why it is, as he has taken to doing more recently, and that's who you are. And then he goes into the postmodernism, or as he says, postmodernism at universities, specifically postmodernist Marxism, which is just not really a problem. And then he ridicules the idea of a Judeo-Christian Western patriarchy. Not political, not right-wing, of course.
inside the philosophical confines of the postmodernist movement, as it manifests itself in universities currently, is that it's very, very important to understand this, because otherwise you don't know what you're facing. There is no debate about free speech, because for the postmodernists, especially the ones that have a Marxist leaning, there is no such thing as free speech. Because you see, in order for there to be free speech, there have to be sovereign individuals, not mere members of a group. And in the postmodernist world, there are no sovereign individuals. That's a Judeo-Christian, oppressive, Western, patriarchal, arbitrary presupposition. It's your group identity that's primary and paramount. You don't have ideas and thoughts. You have what you've been socially conditioned to believe. And the exchange of ideas is nothing but a power game that's played between groups of people who are opposing each other for predominance on the world stage. That's it. And so it's not a debate about the value of free speech. That's a trivial debate in some sense. It's a debate about whether free speech itself actually constitutes a genuine phenomenon.
I would never deny that wacky people exist on all sides of the political spectrum, but these are right-wing caricatures of the left. Why can't we all just admit it and deal with Peterson as a partisan actor? Meanwhile, the non-political, non-right-wing Jordan Peterson so impressed the American conservative publication with his appearance at Liberty University that they've now written up a piece about him and his mission and just how great and wonderful he is. He's not political. He's not right-wing. Just be accountable, okay? I just wish the right-wing heroes would be accountable. I have no problem with the right saying, this is our hero, and they're saying it, and that's fine. Let's just acknowledge that that's what these people are and not live in this fantasy world of Jordan Peterson as the non-political, unbiased observer of society. We know that that's not the case. Let's just stop pretending. We will all be better off if that's what we do. Make sure you're following The David Pakman Show on Instagram at David Pakman Show. Follow me while you're there at david.pakman.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
It is great to welcome back to the program today author and entrepreneur Andrew Yang, who is, as much of our audience has known for a while, because we've been talking about his campaign for some time now, running as a Democrat for president in 2020. Andrew, great to have you back. And it seems like everybody's talking about you now. You're talking to Fox Business and Fox News, and you're all over the place, which is a great thing.
Well, thank you, David. As you say, you and your audience knew about me before anyone else. But yeah, I'm being discovered more and more. I'm going to be on MSNBC and CNN a little bit later this week. And I'm polling at 3% in Las Vegas. So we're off to the races.
Well, I'm going to be in Las Vegas soon, so I'm going to find that 3% and talk to them personally. Okay, so there's a bunch of stuff. I mean, now, so last time when we had you on, fewer people knew about you. So when I said, let me know what you want me to talk to Andrew about, there were questions, but there were fewer questions. Now that your platform is much more well-known, the questions have just been pouring in, and there's a few things that keep coming up that I feel like you and I can just talk about, and I think it will be satisfactory to those who want to inquire about this stuff. So the first thing is, there's a sort of a contingent which is alleging that you are sort of a pro-business libertarian masquerading as some kind of leftist or progressive, or that there's some hidden agenda that's more represented by your business background than by the politics you're espousing now. What do you say to people who are making those assertions?
Well, I'd love it if they dug into my background, because I think there's a misconception that I'm some sort of like whiz-bang tech entrepreneur. which may have some negative connotations among some people that are like concerned about my motivations. But if they dig into what Venture for America is, it's a 501c3 nonprofit that I started in 2011 that helped train hundreds of young entrepreneurs to create thousands of jobs in places like Detroit, Cleveland, St. Louis, Birmingham, Baltimore, and other cities around the country. And it was very deeply human work. It was young people, it was small businesses, and it's still going strong to this day. And so I think there's some confusion and misconceptions about who I am and the nature of my work this last number of years that might lend someone to the mistaken belief, frankly, that that there's reason to be skeptical about my platform, my motivations. But the platform's there for everyone to see, and it would improve people's lives. I think most people on the left can very easily see that it's among the most progressive platforms in the race. And I put that platform front and center because that's what I believe. Like there's no agenda here. I'm one of the only candidates that's actually put out now 80 policy proposals for the world to see.
And when you look at the rest of the Democratic field, if someone said, how do you position yourself within that field on the basis of your policies? Do you feel as though you are on the left spectrum of the current Democratic contenders? Do you feel that you are closer to the middle? Do you think that it's not an appropriate spectrum, that you're sort of outside of that box?
Yeah, sorry, my family just returned, but I figure that might be welcome for some people. So, again, my policies are out there for everyone to see. Certainly I've been characterized as being among the most progressive candidates in this race, and I would agree with that characterization. But, I'd leave it for others to make their own determination. I will say that putting $1,000 a month into every American adult's hands immediately would be the most transformative move in a progressive direction that we've undertaken in generations.
Okay, so I want to now that we're ready to dig into more detail on UBI, we'll get into that. One last thing on this sort of secret alt-right guy stuff that's circulating, just so we can sort of put it to bed. The white nationalist Richard Spencer tweeted positively about you talking about what he calls white death and deindustrialization and automation and so on and so forth. This is a guy I've interviewed. He's a key player in the white nationalist alt-right right now. That's not someone whose support you're interested in, I presume.
Yeah, I've already disavowed the support of anyone who has any kind of agenda of hatefulness or racism. And I've said, look, I don't want their support. And if you look at me and my background, I'm the son of immigrants. I've been working, like in a progressive direction for years and years. And so I have limited control over some of the people that decide that my platform is something they're interested in, but I've already disavowed the support of anyone who has beliefs that are antithetical to mine in that way.
Okay, let's now get into UBI. You and I initially connected over universal basic income, something I've been covering for years at this point. I'm a supporter of UBI. The devil is in the details, as is often the case. So I think this is a good opportunity to talk about some of the questions that there are around how you would structure it. You call it the freedom dividend. You're talking about $1,000 a month for all Americans, not means tested. Is that a good general overview of how you see the proposal?
Yeah, that's exactly right.
Okay. So the questions that have come up are around the idea of replacing existing welfare benefits with UBI. So, for example, someone who might be getting $300 worth of food stamps per month already would, if I understand correctly, only get $700 of the $1,000 maximum dollars that would be available under the freedom dividend. Is that an accurate understanding as well?
That's generally correct. The freedom dividend is meant to be opt-in. But if you opt in, then you're saying, look, I prefer this to the $300 that I'm getting. So in that particular case, that would be right.
So my concern with that is the following. I've always thought that one of the primary goals of UBI should be to raise the standard of living for as many people as possible in a way that makes a difference in their lives, which I think is an important part of it. And so what concerns me about the way I think you've outlined the plan, and of course you'll have an opportunity to tell me if I'm misunderstanding it, is that if someone is extraordinarily wealthy, without the means testing, they get an additional $1,000 a month. If someone is already receiving $1,000 a month of welfare benefits on the basis that their income qualifies them, those would be simply replaced dollar for dollar with your $1,000 freedom dividend. So in practice, you could have something which I agree should not be means tested. I'm completely with you there, but that ends up giving rich people who don't need an extra $1,000 a month $1,000 and leaving people already on welfare with $1,000 from UBI instead of $1,000 from other programs.
Yeah, and so there are a few elements to this, David. The first is that I want to fund this with a value-added tax that would end up harvesting a lot of money from that person at the very top of the pyramid. Because right now, and if you look at the person at the very tippy top, someone like Jeff Bezos, he's worth $160 billion, and Amazon paid $0 in federal taxes last year.
Okay.
So my plan would generate literally billions of dollars from Amazon by giving the American people a slice of every Amazon transaction and every Google search and every Facebook ad and every robot truck mile. And then this would be the net. We would end up harvesting literally billions, maybe tens of billions of dollars from Jeff Bezos. So if we then send him $1,000 a month to remind him that he's an American, then, you know, like, especially as you say, there are many benefits to not means testing it. So the goal is to destigmatize this program and say, look, this is a new right of citizenship. It's just like in Alaska, everyone gets it. Like, we're not going to monitor you. We're not going to keep track of changes in circumstances. We're not going to make this a rich to poor transfer. But the net effect is that it does end up getting money from the people that are in position to benefit the most from our society. So that's the first big thing, is that the funding mechanism ends up making it so that the wealthy who are great at, frankly, avoiding income taxes end up paying their fair share.
Well, I want to talk about the VAT tax specifically, so I'm glad you mentioned it, and we'll get to that. I still can't get away from the reality, though, that if you currently have $1,000 a month in welfare benefits that you're receiving, the freedom dividend goes into play, and they still get just that same $1,000. I'm unsure how those individuals are benefiting if they're just swapping $1,000 from a couple of programs for $1,000 from the freedom dividend. What about those individuals? Are they better off?
Yeah, so there are at least 3 ways in which they're better off.
Okay.
So the first is that a lot of the existing programs have monitoring and requirements. You have a case manager, and so if you said, look, you can have $1,000, no questions asked, that's actually an improvement for the person in that situation.
It saves
in many
time,
cases,
so to speak. They don't have to continually verify that they continue to qualify for the program.
Yes, and another advantage to that too is that right now that there are some games playing going on where you know, it's like you can't report anything past a certain level or else your benefits are reduced. So 1, your reporting goes down. 2, the incentives change. 3, there's no stigma because now everyone's getting it, and, like, you know, there's no negative association. And the 4th thing is that in many cases, these people have children that if they have children and as soon as a child turns 18, that child starts getting $1,000 a month, that is a game changer. And I'm a parent, as you can tell. And so if you're a parent and you know that your children will start receiving $1,000 a month at age 18, that's an enormous burden that's lifted. If you were a parent, which in many cases there's a young person in the family that when they become 18, this would be an enormous change in circumstances.
So let's talk about the funding mechanism a little bit. And you and I have not talked about this before. You talked about the VAT tax, a value-added tax. And the idea would be really rich people like Jeff Bezos, as you mentioned, are going to, you know, he can reduce his wages significantly and avoid paying income tax on wages. Capital gains taxes are low. So the VAT tax is a way to actually get more money in a more difficult to avoid way from somebody like Jeff Bezos. My concern is that VAT taxes are notorious for, on a percentage basis, being overwhelmingly borne by poor people rather than rich people. And I'll explain what I mean by that just so it's clear to the audience. When you are a very wealthy person and a VAT tax is placed on your consumption, it's true that in terms of the number of dollars, you are likely going to pay significantly more dollars in terms of a VAT tax than a poor person. But because the poor person has a much higher what's called marginal propensity to consume, they are more likely to need every last dollar they have to fund their more meager lifestyle. On a percentage basis, the poor person pays more of their income to the VAT tax than the very rich person. That seems to run counter to the goals of your proposal. Am I missing something about how VAT taxes work in practice?
No, you are largely correct. And the way that we can amend this is that VAT taxes and other parts. So first, we're the only advanced economy in the world right now that does not have a VAT value-added tax.
True.
Because as you say, they're much, much more efficient at getting the revenue from the Jeff Bezoses of the world, who are expert at not paying a whole lot of income tax. But in other countries as well, they have value-added taxes that are effectively higher on luxury goods that get consumed by people of greater means, and lower or even total exemptions on consumer staples that are consumed by the poor. So you're 100% correct that in a vacuum, a value-added tax ends up being a bigger burden on someone with less money, because it's like that incremental cost is a bigger deal if you are living on a fixed income than if you're swimming in money. But there are ways to make the value-added tax less burdensome on the people with the least, and that would be the plan. And other countries, again, have already done this.
How do you do that? Do you exempt certain spending from the VAT tax?
Yeah, that's exactly right. Like, you just exempt various consumer staples that that working class Americans end up spending more of their income on. And the trade-off then is you get less money, which is fine, because to me, the goal with the VAT is to go where the money is, not where the money isn't, if you know what I mean. But yeah, you could exempt various consumer staples, and then you get less revenue, but that would be the plan.
So in essence, it becomes more of a luxury VAT tax, so to speak.
Yeah, that's right.
We're speaking with Andrew Yang. He is running for president in 2020 in the Democratic primary. We will continue our conversation with him on tomorrow's program, talking about free college, or as I prefer to call it, college paid through taxation. It's not actually free. We'll pick up the conversation with him then.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
I want to talk a little bit about California today, because it's going to expose something that's a much more general principle in life, which we've talked about before, and it relates to really so many different aspects of politics and society and culture. It turns out we now have detail about the February jobs numbers. So it's April. Friday we'll get the March jobs numbers, but now we got more detail about the February jobs numbers. And it turns out that 75% of the new jobs added in February were added in California, okay? Of all the new jobs on the February jobs report, 75% came from 1 out of 50 states, the state of California. This is really important for a few different reasons. And one of those reasons is that the right will often slam California as this terrible progressive experiment that's failing, it's gone wrong, except for the conservative parts of California. Once you get away from those liberal coastal cities, it's actually a very conservative state outside of those cities. But anyway, they say that it's this horrible progressive experiment gone wrong. And then the Trump job numbers come out, and they cheer them, of course. But 75% of those non-farm jobs that were added in February were in California. Not, by the way, in the conservative parts of California, but in those supposedly ultra-left, failing, wacky, liberal coastal California cities. So let's talk about this on a few different levels, and I think you'll see where I'm going with this. There's a concept called the Pareto principle, okay? Or Pareto, some people say. I say Pareto. Why? Who knows? Now, I know that this is a principle that sometimes people will misuse to justify bad policy. Sometimes people will use the Pareto principle to justify racism. I want to short circuit all of that, okay? I'm not suggesting any policy here. I'm just pointing out that it's a useful tool to analyze what we're seeing in terms of the jobs numbers and beyond. The Pareto principle sometimes is known as the 80-20 rule. And it says, put very simply, in many areas of life, 80% of the effects come from 20% of the causes. It goes back to an Italian economist named Vilfredo Pareto, who noticed that in Italy at the time that he was alive, 20% of the people owned 80% of the land in Italy. In sales, people will often say 80% of my revenue comes from just a key 20% of my clients. And then the other 20% of the revenue is made up of 80% of the clients. I've noticed that, like, for example, with our affiliate stations that we distribute the show to, 80% of the problems that they have, technical problems, questions, complaints, whatever, 80% of the problems are coming from 20%, or probably even less than 20% of affiliate stations. Our ad sales that we do on the show, it might not be 80-20 at this point, since we're still building it out, but I don't think it's a crazy exaggeration that 20% of our advertisers are the big advertisers, and we get like 80% or 75, maybe 70% of our revenue from just that 20%. So it's not that surprising that in the United States, you've got a country of 330 million people. California has about 11% of the population, but in February, 75 or 74% of new jobs were there. So as a general rule, it's not shocking that some parts of the country are overrepresented in new jobs and other parts of the country are average or even below average, and you end up with this Pareto distribution. Now, sometimes that distribution is used to justify disenfranchising or cutting people out of society. You can use it to justify racism and sexism and all sorts of stuff, and that's not what I'm doing here. I'm pointing out that all of these right-wing critiques about California's falling apart, sanctuary cities are a disaster, high taxes, people are moving out, homeless people in San Francisco, Gavin Newsom is a disaster, Nancy Pelosi is a train wreck, all of this stuff. Check out, for example, Charlie Kirk's Twitter account sometimes. Here's just one example of the pile-on with California. He's a well-funded propagandist. He tweeted this just yesterday. Gavin Newsom just promised to do whatever he can to have California help El Salvador after Donald Trump cut off their foreign aid. Maybe the governor should focus on doing what he can to clean up his own mess. High homelessness, failing education, typhus outbreaks, okay? Here's the hypocrisy. On the other hand, when the left points out, hey, you know, if you look at the 2016 election, Hillary won by 2.9 million votes, the right will say, whoa, 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 that's just California. Hillary won California by millions of votes. If you take away California, then all of a sudden, she actually didn't do so well. Take California out of the new jobs numbers, a state that you claim is completely failing, and all of a sudden, Donald Trump's average to okay job numbers don't look quite so good. Like Donald Trump always says, if we had a popular vote rather than an electoral vote election, everybody would run a different campaign. In the same way, if California wasn't a state, the population would be distributed differently. And you can't really just say, if it weren't for California, Hillary would have lost the popular vote, because those 30 million people, or however many live in California, would be living in other states. So that's the message here. More importantly, the Pareto principle. As a mathematical reality, it's logical that an overwhelming amount of the margin in an election would appear in just a few places. If you look at the Electoral College, it's the same thing. There are 12 states that are regularly considered swing states in presidential elections, depending on where you look. 12 out of 50 states, meaning 24% of U.S. states are responsible for almost 100% of the decision-making power in terms of who becomes president of the United States. Pareto principle. So the lessons are, number one, don't attribute agency where there isn't necessarily agency. That's how ancient civilizations, early civilizations got religion. They'd see the sun go up and down and they'd say, seems like someone must be making the sun go up and down, therefore God. The Pareto principle and Pareto distribution tells us a lot about how our world works, and whether it's jobs numbers in California, Hillary Clinton's popular vote margin in 2016, don't attribute agency to places where what we see are sort of mathematical distributions. This is over their heads. I don't think you're going to see Charlie Kirk anytime soon tweeting about this, but hopefully it's informative for our audience as well. We have a voicemail number. That number is 219-2-DAVID-P. The voicemail line is made possible by our good friends over at Linguist, which is a simple and super effective language learning app, which I've been using to refresh my French in advance of a trip to France for work that I have upcoming. It uses artificial intelligence algorithms to recognize areas of weakness to speed up your language learning. And you can try it for free, no credit card needed, at linguist.com/Pacman. That's linguist with a V.com/Pacman. Okay, today's voicemail is a compilation. There is a very, very angry Trumpist named Jimmy from Philly. He is extraordinarily furious with me every time he calls. He was featured on live calls several weeks ago. It has come to my attention that he is calling all the time. He's leaving voicemails, sometimes multiple voicemails in a row about things I don't even understand, sometimes very, very late at night. So we took just a few seconds of a bunch of his voicemails. Imagine calling a show this frequently and being this angry. Take a listen.
David, Jimmy from Philly. So you think it would be unreasonable to expect Mueller to call Barr out after almost 2 years of investigation? David, Jimmy from Philly. You're doing the Hatred Mail segment a misjustice here, an injustice. I'm sorry. David, Jimmy from Philly. I just saw your interview with Jesse Lee Peterson, where you're talking about Christine Ford, and you had stated that false allegations were made against you, and because the allegations were so obviously not credible, that they didn't go anywhere. Well, I can tell you from personal experience that that's not necessarily true. David, Jimmy from Philly, the Hart Bashett is now in the process of destroying your narrative on all of your videos. Hey, Pacman, Jimmy from Philly, I'm shocked that you didn't open up a phone line at 9 subscribers. Come on, man. Who are you kidding? David, Jimmy from Philly here. Why won't you tell your flock of the laws regarding special counsel investigations? They cannot release any information on anyone not charged. You know this.
Yeah. Apparently, that is a real accent, by the way. And we are unsure whether that's Jersey or actually Philly. I don't know. I've never heard anything like it. But Jimmy from Philly, very angry, very much on the phones. And is maybe we'll hear from him live at some point in the future. We've got a great bonus show coming up for you. Become a member, become a patron to get instant access. www.joinpacman.com. Coupon code, this is 2020, saves you 40%. You get 100% of the member benefits, but you save 40% off of the price.
The David Pacman Show at davidpacman.com.